Education opens doors for the gospel, bringing hope to dark places and sparking lasting change around the world. At Teach Beyond, we're reaching the nations through education.
This is Transformed and Transformational, a podcast from Teach Beyond. I'm Kian.
And I'm Heather. We're exploring how the gospel transforms us and overflows to impact classrooms, communities, and the world.
Let's jump into today's conversation. Well, Heather, today is the first week of December, so we're beginning to talk about Christmas.
Yes, and I'm so glad we're talking with a guest today to get us thinking about how we can make the most of the Christmas season. And I don't mean like doing more things or having just the right Advent reading plan. We've talked about those things on the podcast before, different Advent studies and how we can use this season. But today we're focusing on being intentional with living out our faith with boldness and authenticity.
Today we are joined by Kevin King, who is the president and co-founder of International Project, a mission organization focused on church planting among the diaspora. Kevin and his wife moved to New York City in 1998 to reach the nations on college campuses and in ethnic neighborhoods. Kevin has a bachelor's degree in Bible, a master's in biblical counseling, and a master of divinity degree.
And I actually first met the Kings at my home church growing up. They were missionaries supported by my church, so they would come back and share about their ministry occasionally. And now I'm supported by that same church, so it's fun to have that connection. But it's great to be talking with Kevin about this topic and about his book.
That is such a fun connection.
And you know, Kian, I think that when we talk about sharing our faith or having spiritual conversations, that can cause some angst for us. So I think this conversation is a good reminder of how we can reframe that thinking, how we can overcome some of our fears that can come with the baggage about what evangelism is or what it means to share the gospel.
Yes. So whether we might find sharing our faith exciting or intimidating, especially around the holidays, we know that this will be an encouragement to help us step into the open doors of opportunities in front of us.
Let's go over to the conversation with Kevin now. Welcome to the podcast, Kevin.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hi, Kevin. We are so glad to be talking with you today about spiritual conversations and sharing our faith with others, as well as just this Christmas season. So maybe can I start off by asking, do you have any Christmas traditions or specific ways that you observe Advent that you get excited about each year?
Well, I think you might not like my answer, but no,
Okay.
no. Well, it's funny because, we do on Christmas Day, we have dinner and we read the Christmas story, but, and my wife and daughter go through an Advent book, which I do not go through it with them. So,
Got it.
I'm kind of like, do you ever hear the passage in Romans 14 where it says one person considers one day sacred and another person considers every day the same? I'm the everyday the same person. So sorry about that downer.
Hey, you want to know what? I've been considered kind of a Scrooge around Christmas season and Christmas songs and everything else. So I'm okay with that. I'm okay with those
Well, I
answers.
wasn't saying I was a Scrooge.
I wasn't either. No, I take those. I didn't mean that.
No, I'm joking. Yeah.
Oh,
So no, I don't have anything any super strong traditions except for, the normal traditional things like Christmas meal and, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Who will be around your table for Christmas this year, as far as you know?
Well, we actually will go to my sister's house. So it'll be my sisters and their kids and my kids and, other people like that. Yep. In Pennsylvania.
Nice. It's good to have some time with family. Well, Kevin, you wrote a book called Living Out Loud, Letting Your Love for God Flow into Your Everyday Language. And so, just thinking about the idea of sharing our faith and letting our love for God flow into our conversations, that can make people feel a little nervous. So I'm curious, why do you think that is?
Well, I think just even the word evangelism just makes people nervous. And I think so much baggage has been built up over time about what it means to do evangelism that people have this fear. And I think that it's partly because we all know that we are called to be light and we are called to be salt and we are called to be the aroma. We're called to be fishers of men. We're called to make disciples. And then I think there's this gap between what we know we're called to do and this pressure, like, I hate this idea of evangelism because they have some wrong baggage or bad baggage about the picture of what it's like. You know what I mean? So one, I think that the culture has discipled us with really negative views of evangelism. We don't have a positive concept of what it actually looks like. I think we have some habitual things that we've done in terms of interacting with people that makes it hard for us to overcome it. And I also think we project a lot of negative responses on in our own mind, and we assume that up front, which is actually a false narrative that's going on in our minds. So I think that's the reason.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, you talk about baggage and what that might look like and what, because I mean, there is the perception that, yeah, maybe I'm carrying around this baggage too of Christians being perceived as kind of pushy and kind of evangelism, where it's asking, going up to random strangers and kind of trying to evangelize to them, and they're not interested. They don't want to hear a Christian talking about that. Um, Versus kind of what you described as living out loud. So maybe is what I'm picturing accurate, or is that misconceptions? Is that baggage? Kind of how do you engage with that?
So, just this is a little bit of an aside, but I think there's two ways that people are engaged spiritually. One is living out loud, which is an extension of what's in the book Deuteronomy 6, this idea of talk about the Lord. When you sit at
Mhm,
home, talk about the Lord. When you walk along the road, talk about the Lord. When you lie down, when you get up. So we're talking about the Lord all the time. So that's one way that people are engaged spiritually is they just hear us talk about the Lord in our language, and then they either respond in a number of different ways. The
mhm,
other is this Luke 10 variation where Jesus sent out the apostles and the disciples two
mhm,
by two. He told them exactly what to do, he gave them a script. And I actually think both things are important. Um, and I actually think that if you do the living out loud piece, you will end up sharing the gospel naturally and going through some explanation of what it means to know Christ and follow him. But I think that evangelism training that has happened in the past has only focused on learn a presentation, and then here, this is the kind of bridge that you'll use to get into that topic. But the bridges generally feels very awkward to us. And the reason that type of evangelism training alone isn't sufficient is because most people can never get to the bridge to get
mhm,
into the gospel.
mhm,
They
mhm.
feel like, what's wrong with me? And it's
Yeah,
because they've
yeah.
never been trained to live out loud.
Mhm.
So let me just say, living out loud is not living obnoxiously at all. That's not what we mean by living out loud. Um, what we mean is being comfortable in our own spiritual skin so that our worldview of knowing Christ, having a relationship with God, just naturally comes out in our language.
I'm thinking of a lot of like kind of the packaged ways you talk about faith. The way I've been taught talk about faith almost feels there's a big part of like apologetics that is kind of baked into that conversation of you're going to share your faith and then you're going to have to like argue it and defend it and have like all this evidence. And maybe that's what you're kind of saying is like that could be a part of it, but that's not living out loud. That's not like living out your faith in a way publicly. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Or is that
So, someone can argue, hey, your whole argument about living out loud, that's not necessarily sharing the gospel. And I would say you're correct. Living out loud is not about give this presentation. Living out loud is living in a way where people will know you're spiritual. And then if they're interested, they will dig in a little bit more, and then you will share the gospel. Then you will explain. But there's never this pushiness of trying to, with a clear agenda, trying to, push the gospel on someone. Um, it's just engaging people as a spiritual person. And because we are spiritual people, it'll come out through our language. So I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but um, I think people have this conception of evangelism where I have to somehow push the gospel into this conversation, and I can't do that well, and people don't like it.
And I think it's such a good point that we end up feeling like a failure if we don't do that at all, or we don't do it well, or there's this guilt that I know I'm called to this, but I don't know how to do it. And so the idea that it is a certain separate thing that needs to be inserted, and if I don't insert it well or at all, then I haven't succeeded, right? So I'm curious, can you flesh out a little bit more how you would define what it means to live out loud and like what that looks like in everyday life, knowing that you're distinguishing that from just sharing the gospel. So what does that look like?
Okay, so We talked about Deuteronomy 6. Deuteronomy 6, it's called the Shema, and it starts
Mhm.
out with the Hebrew word Shema, which is hear. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, and with all of your soul, and with all of your strength. And then it says, these things I've commanded you today are to be on your hearts, impress them on your children. And then it says, talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up, blah, blah, blah. Um, so what it's saying is the way to love God with all of your heart and all of your soul and all of your strength, what that actually looks like is that we talk about him. Okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
So we we very comfortably talk about God at church,
Mm.
you know,
Mm.
like we might say, yeah, I'm praying about taking this new job and I'm just
Mhm.
asking for wisdom.
Yeah.
And so that's living out loud. You're living your spirituality very comfortably out loud within this community.
Mhm.
The problem is that when we go outside of the church, we then put a bowl over our lampstand and
Mm.
we change our language. So,
Mhm.
one of the signs that we have that we're actually suppressing our spirituality is when we have two different sets of language, one set of language that we use at church,
Hmm.
and then one set of language that we use outside of church.
Yeah.
So at church, like I said, you might say, oh, I'm praying about getting this new job, taking this new job, and I'm asking for wisdom. And then with our unbelieving friends, we might say, oh, I'm considering taking this new job and I'm weighing the pros and cons.
Mm.
Um, and so when I'm talking about living out loud, I'm saying just use the same language with everybody.
Mm.
Don't switch your language with unbelievers. So
Yeah.
with unbelievers, you just say, yeah, I'm really praying about taking this new job and I'm asking for the Lord's wisdom. Now,
Mm.
that I'm not trying to push the gospel on someone right there, but I can tell you they're going to respond in one of three ways when I say that. One, they might respond positive and say, "Really? So you pray and you ask God about, and you're trying to find out what God's thinking about this?" And I
Mm.
would say, "Yeah." And now they're inquiring, and I might just say, "Yeah, and I might share my testimony.
Mhm.
And then if they respond to that, then I'll share the gospel. Or that's one way they respond. The other way is they just ignore it. Okay, that's fine. And then I just continue in the conversation because this is not a strategy. This is just me being who I am as a spiritual person.
Mhm.
And then the third option is that they actually respond negatively and they say, "What? What are you ridiculous or you're one of those weirdos or." And
Yeah.
so there are the three options that people either they respond positively, it's neutral, they don't respond, or they respond negatively.
Yeah.
I'll tell you this, we have this fear that 95% of people are going to respond negatively.
Mhm.
And my experience is very few people respond negatively. Most of them
Mhm.
will just ignore it. And if you're not awkward about your spirituality,
Yeah.
they won't
Yeah.
feel awkward about it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by living out loud. It's just being the spiritual people and allowing people to see who we actually are genuinely.
Mhm. Mhm. I wonder too, Kevin, if there's a fear that they will respond positively,
That's
that
such a good.
now that might lead me into the next phase of this conversation that I
Then what do
wasn't
I
ready
do?
for. Because you said
Yeah.
the word testimony and you said the word gospel, and now I have to somehow have this memorized script, this, right, the inserting this presentation. So how do we then, let's say it is a positive interaction, scenario 1, what about the fear of knowing what to do next?
It's funny because Jesus brought up this whole idea of the fear of what you might say when he said, "You might be brought before kings, and don't worry about what you're going to say. I'll give
Yeah,
you the words
yeah,
at the time." So
yeah.
it's so
Mm.
funny that even the apostles had this fear of what am I going to say?
Yeah.
But look, if you feel comfortable sharing your testimony, then you'll share it. If you feel
Mhm,
comfortable explaining the gospel, then you'll explain it. If you don't feel comfortable with those, then just say, hey, well, if you're interested in learning more about God, why don't you come to church with me?
mhm,
Like
mhm.
you don't have to be so afraid of what if.
Yeah, yeah.
And if they ask you a question you don't know, just say, yeah, I don't really know that. I know God has impacted my life, but I don't really know the answer to that.
Yeah,
And so we
yeah,
don't really have to be afraid
yeah,
of what if they respond positively. Just
yeah.
say what you know. And if
Yep.
you don't know it, don't worry about it.
Isn't that more authentic too to say, actually, I'm learning that too. Like, we could learn this together,
Exactly.
or,
A-
yeah, I'd love to
And
explore
unbelievers are
that
actually
more.
more attracted to that
Yes, right, right, exactly.
than having all
It's
the
true.
answers, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I say don't worry about it, just be who you are. But so the reason living out loud is different than evangelism training is, to be honest with you, it's not really about doing evangelism. It's just about being genuine spiritual people.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
just happens to be that these people who live out loud end up sharing the gospel the most and leading the most people to Christ.
Mhm.
So it's not
Mhm.
a strategy, really.
Right, right. It's actually helping us be whole people and authentically how God is growing us and, like, fully sharing our lives rather than feeling like we have these segmented compartments.
That's right. And so
Yeah.
the book is really about trying to dismantle some of these false beliefs and narratives that are actually hindering us from being genuine people
Mm, mm,
and just
mm.
being comfortable spiritually in our own skin.
Let's take a short break for a story from the field.
My name is Carmen Gunderson. I'm a Beyond Borders member with Teach Beyond.
My name is Sarah, and I am a partner of Teach Beyond, and we're working together on multiple educational projects, specifically for refugee children, both in the city center of Athens and also outside of Athens, near and around refugee camps. When we welcome the children, we see a lot of different things, and they have a lot of challenges. They've experienced a lot of very traumatic events. Their countries that they're coming from are usually war-torn, or there's a lot of chaos. Oftentimes, by the time we intersect with them, they've been on the refugee highway multiple years. So when they get here, they have a lot of gaps in their learning. Some of them have never been in school. Some of them have had maybe a year or two of school, but there may be like a 3 to 5 year gap, all in their very formative years.
One of the moms in my English class, her name is Sherry, and she has 2 kids. And they come to the Journeys English class, and she comes to my English class. Sherry is a young mom who, from her culture, married young and started a family young. So she left school at a young age. She really wants to learn. One day she said to me in Arabic through Google Translate, "I love learning." And even though I don't speak Arabic, I could see it in her eyes and her smile that she loves to learn.
Sherry told us about her children, that they had a pretty dramatic journey from their home country through other countries, and the kids had had a really difficult time. And they weren't in school, so these 2 classes they have a week is kind of their school.
She's just so thankful that she can come to the Catafio education program and bring her kids, and that they have access to education while they're waiting on the refugee highway.
For our weekly spotlight, we are focusing on physicians teaching English as a foreign language, or English as a second language. If you want to learn more about opportunities to serve in EFL or ESL, visit the Teach Beyond Opportunity Board at teachbeyond.org/go, or click on the link in the show notes.
And now back to the conversation with Kevin.
Kevin, I'm curious. So you live in New York City, and I'm curious how you've seen this play out in your experience as you've interacted with your friends, people in your community, people you interact with throughout the day. How have you seen this kind of living out loud actually play out?
Yeah. Can I actually share? I'm going to share 2 stories. One about me and then one about somebody else, because I think it's such a great story. So there was a point, I'm here sharing the gospel. I'm here as a worker trying to reach unreached people groups, people from nations all over the place, and engage them spiritually. But one of the things I realized is I would plan to go out and do it, but I actually wasn't engaging a lot of people along the way as I just went to the store, went to the gym, walked to the park. And God started to challenge me on that. He said, Kevin, you need to slow down and engage people along the way and turn up your volume, because my volume, I think we can drift into not
Mm,
engaging people.
mm,
So the Lord was challenging me on that. And then I went to the gym and I was working out. And as I was walking out, I was thinking, okay, I just need to slow down and engage people. So it was the winter. I was putting my clothes on by, getting ready to walk out the door. And I said to the woman behind the counter, I said, "Oh, hey, how you doing?" And she responded really strong. She was like, "Oh, I'm doing great." So I was trying to think of a way to just engage her spiritually and live out loud. Because when you're not used to doing it and you try to start doing it, I just need to say up front, if you're not used to living out loud and you begin to try to do it more, it might feel awkward in the beginning because you're going through this process of just being genuine and trying to engage people spiritually. So, anyway, she said, I'm doing great. Now, I could have been like, oh, praise God or praise the Lord. That would have been like a living out, but that didn't quite feel right. So I was trying to think of what I could say to her to let her know that I'm a spiritual person, and it wasn't coming quickly. So I said this. I said, well, why are you so great? She goes, well, I had lost my phone and I found it. And now I'm trying to think of another spiritual statement to make, and nothing was coming to me. Of course, I could have said praise the Lord, but I'm not really a praise the Lord type of person, you know. So I said this, which was really stupid, but I said it. I was like, "You should call all your friends together to celebrate." Which sounds ridiculous. And she ignored it. And of course, she had no idea what I was talking about. And then she explained that it fell down in the recliner. It was several days later, blah, blah, blah.
Wow.
She
Yeah.
found it. And I said, actually, there's this story in the Bible where someone loses something and they find it and they gather all their friends together to celebrate. And so that's why I said that earlier. I said, actually, the story is really about how when someone's far from God and they come back, how all the angels celebrate. So that's why
Huh.
I said that. She responded and said this. She said, I've never been to church and I've never read the Bible. She said, but for some reason, about 3 weeks ago, I decided to buy a Bible.
Huh.
I said, really? I said, are you interested in learning more about God? She was like, I bought a Bible. I'm like, all right, I get it. Yeah. So God had been working in her life, you know what I mean? Uh, Drawing her to himself through there were probably a lot of events that were going on that maybe she wasn't even aware of, but
Mhm.
now she was sensing this spiritual thirst or hunger, and she bought a Bible. God
Mm.
was working in me at the same time to turn up my spiritual volume and live out loud. And then he divinely orchestrated our paths to
Wow.
cross at that moment
Yeah.
and for this to happen.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but what I find is that people who consistently live out loud have all kinds of quote unquote coincidences, which aren't
Uh-huh.
coincidences, all the time, where they're finding people who are spiritually receptive. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I used to think, oh, if I don't engage this woman, she'll die and go to hell. And I believe in hell, but I think it's a little bit different. I feel like God was already working in her heart. And if I didn't live out loud, then he would have brought one of his faithful children along who would live out loud. And they would have engaged her and helped her come closer to him. And I would sit on the sidelines, always
Mhm.
thinking, man, why is it that that person always leads so many people to the Lord and I never have these conversations?
Mhm.
Because that person is living out loud. So
Mhm.
if we live out loud, we actually find that there are people all around who are spiritually receptive.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
let me say one of this. We talked earlier about why are we so quiet. Well, there's a passage in Luke that if we actually believed it, it would change, I think, our whole mindset in living out loud. And it's in Luke chapter 10. And it says this, Luke 10:2. It says, Jesus says, the harvest is plentiful.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's true today too. And we actually don't believe that. We believe the harvest is not very plentiful. Everybody's going to reject me. Nobody's spiritually interested. Um, and because we don't believe that passage, we go out with fear. But if we actually believed that there were thousands of people all around us who are spiritually receptive, that changes our whole posture in going out. And it takes away a lot of that fear. So that's a case where, you just live out loud. And we have so many stories like that. You know what I mean? Of all
Mhm.
people in our
Mhm.
in our ministry and in our house churches who are just trying to live out loud and seeing God bring these people who are spiritually receptive. So it's super exciting.
Mm. I love as you were sharing that also the internal monologue, like that you're sharing kind of your own thoughts there, that even when, oh, nothing's really coming to mind and I kind of wonder what I should be saying here, that's so relatable. And that as we encounter like a mental block in the moment, or just, I don't know what's actually going to lead us closer. We can trust the what you said before is true, that the Lord will provide the words that we need in that moment. And what feels like a fumble or feels like I didn't really do that quite how I wanted is just part of interacting with humans. And it
Totally.
ended up like, leading into a conversation you never could have expected. So I love that. And it's not going to go that way every time, right? You're sharing these stories as examples of what could happen, but also probably plenty of other times it doesn't really go anywhere and you move on.
That's exactly right. Most of the time it's neutral.
Yeah, but you're growing your faith muscles or your like obedience in that moment to just, say what the Lord is leading you to say in that moment, even if it kind of feels weird, because we don't know what paths he's intersecting and how the other person might respond, right?
Yep. That
Yeah.
feeling of what should I say, that mostly happens as you're in the beginning when you're really trying to become comfortable,
Mhm.
where you haven't previously been comfortable. As you become more and more comfortable and you become more natural at letting your spirituality flow out, those cases where you're like, what should I say, become less and less.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but we have this, so sometimes it feels awkward in the beginning. We have this saying in our ministry that awkward conversations change lives.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? And
And theirs
and
and ours, right? Because as we grow in the like just familiarity with this type of conversation, it grows our own faith too.
totally. And
Yeah.
when it comes to awkward conversations, I feel like saying, look, half the people, like if I'm talking to a room, I might say half the people in this room might not be married if it wasn't for an awkward conversation somewhere. You know what I
There you
mean?
go.
Like we all have awkward conversations at times, like
Yeah,
when you're interested in someone and you want to, hey, do you want to go get
yeah,
coffee?
yeah,
Or,
yeah,
you're just like, oh, why did I say that? That
yeah.
was so stupid. So
That's
I
funny.
think it's just part of you become more and more comfortable the more you do something.
Sure.
So I was at this church and I was giving this talk about living out loud, and someone in the congregation left, and they felt God really challenging them about living out loud. So they go back home and they're driving into their driveway in the suburbs, and their neighbor out there is picking up like sticks between their two yards. There no fence. They was just picking up sticks. So this guy, Bill, who was the believer, decided, oh, I want to go try to live out loud with my neighbor. So he goes out into the yard and he's like, hey, Joe, how's it going? What you doing? He goes, I'm just picking up sticks out in the yard. Um, and Bill's thinking, okay, how can I live out loud? Because he's never really done it with Joe before. And the conversation is going on, and he just gets to a point where he's like, hey, Joe, is there anything I can pray for you about? That's all he says. That was the only thing he could come up with, and that's a very natural, that's just he said, "Hey, is there anything I can pray for you about?" I'm sure it took a lot of courage for him to say that, but he said it, right? And Joe at first was kind of like, "Ah, no, everything's fine," blah blah blah, just kind of blowing it off. And then Bill was like, "Are you sure? Is there anything?" And then Joe kind of is like, "Well, to be honest with you, our marriage is not great. Him and his wife." He says, "Our marriage is not great. So you can pray for that." And then Bill's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that." And then Joe shares a little more. He says, "Actually, my daughters aren't speaking to me either." He said, "You so you can pray about that." He said, "To be honest with you, my whole life is in shambles right now." And as they start talking, Joe, the neighbor, starts bawling in the yard. Sorry. He starts bawling in the yard. And Bill is praying over him in the yard. And then after this whole interaction, Bill goes back in the house and is so shocked that actually just living out loud opened such a huge door that he called the pastor. And I'm driving home, and the pastor calls me and says, Kev, guess what just happened? And this is what Bill said to the pastor on the phone. He said, "This is what happened in the yard with my neighbor." And he says this, he says, "The thing that strikes me about this whole thing is for 10 years, I never engaged Joe spiritually, never in 10 years. And all I had to do was say, Joe, is there any way I can pray for you?" And his heart opened wide open. And he was receptive to me praying over him and talking about the Lord in his life. And he says, "I can't believe it took me so long." And that's what I think happens. This is not about it's not necessarily about a strategy for how to get to the gospel. It will get to the gospel for people who are interested. It's just about feeling comfortable in our own spiritual skin, dismantling all of this false narrative and false beliefs that we've built up. Become comfortable, live out loud, and man, you will actually find out that the harvest is plentiful. So that's really just some examples of this, of how it just opens doors.
Yeah, that harvest is plentiful, workers are few phrase. I often think about the second half and how that's a reality. And in mobilization, we're always thinking about how we need more people to fill positions and to continue to grow things. But I love that focus on the first part. If we really believe the harvest is plentiful, it's going to be a motivating factor to just start having conversations.
Well, the interesting thing about that verse is when we think of the harvest is plentiful, the workers are few, we think of the workers being these professional paid missionaries
Uh-huh.
or church people. And
Sure.
really, you know who the workers are? People who live out loud.
Everyone. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
become spiritual workers in the
Sure.
kingdom just by
Mhm.
being genuine, natural people.
In
And
the
they
front
actually
yard.
start making disciples.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's so
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. If we
That's
just
great.
become comfortable. So, this whole idea, it's not really some crazy idea. It's just reframing evangelism in a way. And in a sense, it's not even about evangelism. Evangelism is really just about being genuine spiritual people. And then the result is that gospel conversations happen.
I love that. That's an amazing story, and just hearing how that was shared and just in a regular conversation, and just the reaction was so positive and engaged and like ready to hear and have that spiritual conversation. Um, I'm curious, so many of our relationships that are like long-term friendships with non-Christians, hopefully they know we're Christians. They know that that's a part of our life, but we might not have those kind of living out loud moments. They might not know, we might not have those Christian conversations and spiritual conversations. And I'm curious how you kind of navigate those where it's, do friends who are non-Christians get tired of you kind of bringing spirituality in quotes into your conversations, or faith into your conversation? They're like, I don't want to talk about that stuff. Like, stop bringing that up. Um, how do you kind of engage with those non-Christians who maybe are tired of that dynamic in your
Yeah.
relationship?
Yeah. Great question. So usually people get tired of something when you're trying to push it on them. Like, why did stop bringing that up? Like almost like you have an agenda to push this on them. But everybody has things in their life that is part of who they are. So for instance, if somebody's an artist, they talk about the art that they made, or oh, this new song, or if they're into music, oh, I love this new artist. Or um, if you are a spiritual person, you might be like, oh, yeah, God has really been working in my life. And you're not trying to push it on them. So if they're tired of it, then they just won't be your friend. You know what I mean? And that's okay, because this is who you are. And, but I think what they get tired of is they get tired of them feeling like you're trying to slip it in because you have
Yeah.
an agenda to change them.
Like they're a project. Yeah.
Like they're a
Yeah.
project. And so, actually, to be honest with you, I think friendship evangelism is a problem. And like, let me explain what I mean. Like, I'm all about being friends and I'm all about being spiritual. Um, but friendship evangelism is this idea that people have defined it as, you know, um, they say this: you don't have the right to engage someone spiritually unless you've earned their trust. So what we do is we hide who we are spiritually, and then we try to build this friendship. And then when we have this friendship, then we try to bring it out. Well, someone could very easily say, hey, we've been friends now for, 7 months. If this is such an important part of your life, how come I've never heard you talk about it before? And that would be valid. Friendship evangelism is like a bait and switch. Hide who you really are until they like you and trust you, and then pull out some new side of you that you've been hiding. It's like a bait and switch. So I just say be who you are, um, without an agenda, and people will either like you or they won't like you. They'll either want to be around you or they won't want to be around you. But trying to, if you find yourself in a situation where you've been friends with this person for 3 years now, and now you're trying to engage them spiritually, basically it just means that you've been covering up who you are, or that you have an agenda. So I do think the steps are just become comfortable. If you're praying about something, just say, "Yeah, I'm really praying about that." If someone says, "How you doing?" You can just say, you could even say things like this. If someone says, "How you doing?" You can just say, not so great. I just feel so dry spiritually. I feel like when I'm praying, God doesn't hear me." Like, you can
Hmm.
just be honest.
Hmm.
And an unbeliever, if you said that, they would love that, because they're like, "That's how I feel when I pray. I feel like God doesn't hear me." Someone's
Hmm.
like, "You would say that to an unbeliever?" I'm like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
half the Psalms say that. God, where are
Mm.
you? How come you don't hear me?" So
Yeah.
I just say be completely genuine.
Mm.
Um, and if you're not, if you've never done that before, yes, you will have to try to allow that to come out. And this is
Mhm.
where it takes some practice and some work to dismantle some of those wrong ways of relating in the
Yeah.
beginning.
Yeah. 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 You were saying before that some of that just happens by doing it, right? Like
Yeah.
just trying it, starting, it can be awkward at first. Do you have any practical suggestions or like maybe an on-ramp almost for growing in our boldness, feeling more comfortable with having spiritual conversations? Any encouragement for someone who's, feeling overwhelmed or hesitant to get started?
Yeah. Well, to be honest with you, so when it comes to, you know, traditional evangelism training is learn this presentation, here's a bridge, go do it. And then no one ever does it. But this is really more about changing your habitual ways of relating to people. And so it doesn't happen quickly. You're changing your style of relating, um, to make it match what you do when you're at church. But I think for it's helpful to have other people who will do it with you, and you can check in with and just say, "Hey, how did you live out loud this week? How did it go? What did you say?" So that kind of gentle, consistent, um, accountability, for lack of a better accountability and encouragement from other people who are also trying to grow in it, is helpful. Um, so without that, I just say, look, if you're reading something in scripture or praying for someone, let them know. If you have a job, pray for your colleagues, and then let them know. Like, "Hey Heather, I'm so sorry that your mom is in the hospital. I just want you to know I'm praying for her. And hey, I was just reading this passage this morning, and I don't know what you think about it. I just wanted to share it with you. Because I was praying for your mother and for you, and maybe this will give you some encouragement." You say that, and I can pretty much guarantee you they're not going to be like, "What do you mean you're praying for me? What are you, a weirdo?" Look, their mom's in the hospital. They're struggling. They're going through a divorce. You're saying, "Hey, Heather, I'm really sorry about that. I'm praying for you." Like, take baby steps, I would say. Take baby steps and try to think about the people in your world and actually pray for them. And when you read scripture, say, "Lord, how does it relate to this person? Um, how can I encourage people around me?"
As you're talking about praying for them, I'm thinking about like praying for opportunities to also share that because that's a prayer that God loves to answer, giving us those opportunities to, naturally integrate that. So that's great, Kevin. Well, Christmas time can be maybe you would say it's just another day on the calendar, but it can be a time of year when people are more open to
All right. I don't
spiritual
think it's just
conversation.
another day, but yes, I hear what you're saying. Yes, go ahead.
They might be more open to spiritual conversations. They're hearing a Christmas
Absolutely.
carol that's talking about the birth of Jesus, and they haven't thought about Jesus, in since last Christmas. Or some people who don't attend church every week might be in church for a Christmas Eve service or something like that. So, what are some ways that we can particularly share our faith and the truth of the gospel at this time of year, if any?
In terms of sharing your faith in the truth of the gospel, if we're just talking about living out loud, I would just say, let people see what you're going through during this time as Christmas is coming. If you're reading an Advent book and people say, "Oh, you have any plans for Christmas?" You can say, "Oh, well, I'm reading this book, and God's really teaching me about this." So just let them see your life. If they respond positively, they're just like, "Oh, really?" And you can say, "Yeah, we're celebrating the fact that Christ came into the world to rescue us from our sin." That might sound crazy, but that's really what I'm just praising God for as Christmas is coming, that God came to rescue us. But I would say, let people see if you're reading a certain book in anticipation of Christmas coming, and people are saying, "Hey, what's going on?" You can just say, "Oh, I just bought this new book," kind of thinking through this as Christmas comes. If you say things casually without awkwardness, then they will not feel awkward. Most of the awkwardness that happens in these conversations happens because we feel awkward, and we have to get comfortable not
Yeah.
feeling awkward about
Yeah.
letting people see. And
Yeah.
if we do that, you'll have lots of conversations around Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
This is great, Kevin. These are great challenges and encouragements to truly live like authentically and
Hmm.
be who you are and share
Hmm.
the gospel in just the way you live your life and the conversations you have.
Hmm.
Um, Before we let you go, we have one final question that we like to ask all of our guests, and so hopefully you're prepared for this. And it is, what is one thing that's changing your life? So this can be something big and really serious, or something small and light. You can kind of take it whichever way you want to go. And so I'll go first, and then Heather, and then you get to go last. So what's changing my life this week in the past few months has been a very opinionated 2-year-old. So our youngest is 2, and he's great and so sweet, and he has become he has strong opinions, and then when he doesn't get what he wants, he gets angry, which has been we're used to it. We've had it with our other kids, but it makes an impact on your life.
Here
So
we are. Yes, this is the
yes,
season.
yep,
Oh,
Very good.
well, what's changing my life is recently I actually returned to a church that supports both of us, Kevin, back to my home area to celebrate 15 years with Teach Beyond and like kind of be with supporters in my supporting community. And I think it's good to take time to pause and celebrate and look back even as we look ahead. So it was just really neat to be able to mark that milestone and be with my sending community and some friends from other walks of other different seasons, which was cool. So
Very
that's what's
cool.
changing my life lately. What about you, Kevin?
Okay, so I had an answer, and I was thinking that you wanted some kind of spiritual answer, but then when you mentioned the 2-year-old, now I have 2
You
answers.
can go whatever direction you want.
So my spiritual answer, this year I decided to really try to really focus on scripture memorization. So there's this
Mm,
app called Verses that I've been using every day this year,
nice.
and it's been incredible just memorizing scripture. So that's my spiritual
Oh,
answer.
love that.
Um, and man, it's just it's transformative just memorizing scripture. The other thing is in my job, I have someone who was hired to work alongside me
Mm,
and to work with me. And it's changing my life
mm,
dramatically. I'm so
hmm.
happy about that. I needed somebody for so long. So
That's
um,
amazing.
much more efficient, getting a lot more done, and it's changing me. So that's
That's
one thing
great.
that
Yes,
I'm
that is
thankful for.
definitely a game changer as the team grows. And Kian and I both have the same experiences that when the team grows, you got to coordinate that, but it's worth it in the long run for sure.
Totally.
That's great.
Totally.
Good. Well, thanks so much for being here with us in this conversation, Kevin. We really appreciate it. This is giving us a lot to think about and to start acting on this month. Maybe even by the end of the calendar year, we're starting to make incremental shifts and looking into the new year. I think you said like habitual changes. It's a long-term thing. It's a constant growing and changing. And so this is great, good food for thought as we take the next steps.
Thank you guys for having me.
I really enjoyed our conversation with Kevin today.
Me too. I wanted to mention that there's a resource page for churches that goes along with this book. So we'll link to that in the show notes and definitely encourage you to check that out and pass it along to others as we think about being intentional in our conversations.
Heather and I serve with Teach Beyond, a mission organization reaching the nations through education.
Want to learn more and get involved? Visit teachbeyond.org or follow us on social media.
To help more people find the podcast and hear about Teach Beyond, we'd love it if you would leave a rating or review and share the show with a friend. Be sure you subscribe or following the show on the platform where you listen so you never miss an episode.
And as always, you can reach us at podcast@teachbeyond.org. We'll see you next week.